Candace Millard's The River of Doubt describes a truly riveting account of Theodore Roosevelt's physically and mentally taxing journey through the Amazon after losing the election of 1912. Millard's thesis states that Theodore Roosevelt's trial and journey into the thousand-mile River of Doubt reflects his on-the-edge lifestyle that defined his presidency and his entire life. Millard asserts that the full image of Theodore Roosevelt includes not only his term as President of the U.S., but also his role of natural explorer and scientific adventurer. The book discusses the journey of Teddy Roosevelt with Father Zahm, Anthony Fiala, George Sherry, Leo Miller, Candido Rondon, and Kermit Roosevelt, of whom only Sherry, Rondon, and Roosevelt's son Kermit traversed the river with TR. Rondon led the expedition alongside Theodore Roosevelt. In The River of Doubt, Millard focuses primarily on the personal aspect of the journey and not necessarily its political context. Millard uses great detail in describing the physical and mental states of Theodore Roosevelt and his son Kermit. Millard also pays particular attention to the conditions faced by Roosevelt and his crew, emphasizing the dangers and exotic wildlife in addition to the forest's indigenous peoples. The work is organized chronologically, suiting its narrative style. The work occasionally references TR's presidency and often references his past, noting how TR's many travails sculpted his bigger-than-life attitude. Millard's decision to include most of this past reflection in the portion of the book preceding TR's entrance into the River of Doubt has a profound impact on the reader. Reflection in the beginning of the book allows the reader to internalize this information while reading about the expedition. The reader can enjoy Roosevelt's gripping adventure without unnecessary and muddled analysis. Millard chiefly uses primary resources in The River of Doubt. Millard relies on journal entries from the most significant figures in the book in order to make the book more personal. Millard's use of journal entries works significantly to let the reader in on the former president's internal struggle during this ordeal. We also learn a lot about Theodore Roosevelt's son, Kermit Roosevelt. By looking into his journal entries, we see how his recent engagement to a woman named Belle impacted his journey on the River of Doubt. Millard uses these journal entries to construct a more complete image of Theodore Roosevelt. While Roosevelt's personal entries give us a deep look into the way he thinks, the journal entries of other figures such as George Sherry let us see the way others thought of Roosevelt. Millard often uses others' journal entries to note of Roosevelt's ability as a raconteur, in addition to his equal willingness to listen to the stories of his fellow explorers. Millard's use of journal entries also works to dispel the reasonable misconception that the other members of the expedition thought the former president incapable of such a rigorous journey. While many originally doubted Roosevelt's capacity to travel down the River of Doubt, the members invariably gained enormous respect for the president, leading to the consensus to rename the River of Doubt the Roosevelt River. Millard's use of primary material from both Teddy Roosevelt and his companions proves that TR is the daring individual that history has ardently claimed him to be. TR's solace in physical trial after losing the election of 1912 alone proves Roosevelt's extreme willpower. His endurance in the actual adventure only builds on this image. By observing Roosevelt's many actions through his personal writings, we see direct support for Millard's thesis. We see continuous trends in Roosevelt's tough and noble thinking that not only applies to Roosevelt's time in the River of Doubt, but, as Millard asserts, in Theodore Roosevelt's entire life. Millard notes that TR's profound interest in nature mirrors his pioneering care for the environment during the presidency. Roosevelt set aside millions of acres for protection, and Roosevelt chose to explore nature after the presidency, just as he chose to protect it during his time in office. Millard delves minimally into the political context of TR's visit, as his big stick policy in Latin America certainly influenced his reception in the South. Millard's SFI not only works in a historical context, but also in a scientific context. Millard significantly describes the dangers lurking around the River of Doubt in great detail and vivid imagery. Millard provides a especially interesting description of the dangerous wildlife in the River of Doubt. For example, Millard meticulously describes the predatory nature of the candiru, noting how the inch-long creature enters the inside of its target and feasts from the inside. Millard's environmental description not only displays the living dangers TR encountered, but also the physical dangers. Millard describes the highlands that Roosevelt and his team had to cross before even reaching the River of Doubt, noting that the vast and dry expanse is difficult to cross by itself. Millard uses this description of the environment to further convey the harshness faced by Roosevelt. Millard's description of TR's surroundings most commonly concern any particular ordeal faced by the former president. For example, Millard at one point goes into great detail describing the multiple venomous snakes in Brazil. Rather than simply listing a random danger faced by TR in the jungle, Millard's comments serve a purpose. She reveals after her description of venomous snakes that TR escaped death from a snake by literally the leather on his boots. Millard's description of the forest and thundering rapids also allow the reader to visualize the types of troubles encountered by TR. These descriptions function significantly to contribute to the book's style as a thriller. The exotic and predatory animals, the tormenting rapids, the sheer distance of the river. Millard makes a point to emphasize just how dangerous the expedition truly was. While the environmental descriptions model the book as a thriller, they also add an element of reality that reminds the reader that a former president of the United States really did put himself through such an ordeal and such pain. Millard's SFI regarding the environment supports her thesis by proving how physically taxing the expedition truly was. Had Millard chosen to omit such significant natural descriptions, the reader wouldn't have been able to see the magnitude of TR's feat. The level of the danger presented by the forest maintains significant importance throughout the book in that it reflects TR's driving willpower. These descriptions also help maintain the reader's focus by appealing to more than just historical interests. Millard's bibliography proves the internal validity of the book in that she used reliable and recent resources when appropriate. As is the nature of a historical book, much of Millard's resources stem from the time period that she's investigating, the early 1900s. The book can be broadly divided between scientific and historical evidence regarding the resources used in the River of Doubt. Millard appropriately relies on primary resources from the early 1900s to construct the historic portion of the book, while using recent resources regarding the scientific portion. This is important in that a greater current scientific understanding allows us to have greater knowledge of the types of troubles faced by the expedition, in addition to how they impacted the journey. Essentially, the reader gets a more accurate view of environmental conditions than did Roosevelt, due to the fact that we are able to look back on the expedition in retrospect with greater technology. Because Millard mainly intends to simply tell the story of Roosevelt's journey through the River of Doubt, there's little room for bias in this book. The River of Doubt serves not to assert a controversial claim, but rather to tell the enjoyable story of one of U.S. history's most fascinating figures. At the same time, Millard's status as a former writer and editor of National Geographic likely accounts for much of the River of Doubt's significant focus on the environmental context of TR's expedition, aside from simply the historical context. This brings us to the audience of the book. The lack of complex theories and in-depth historical analysis proves that Millard did not intend the River of Doubt for historians, but rather the general public and students. Millard's work appeals specifically to the many lovers of Theodore Roosevelt, whose bigger-than-life attitude has captivated the public in both his time and beyond. The River of Doubt also appeals to those interested in the Amazon and nature. The mapping of the 1,000-mile-long tributary of the Amazon River was a significant accomplishment in the research of the area, while Millard's vivid descriptions of TR's surroundings will surely attract the attention of this type of audience. Noting this, I would recommend The River of Doubt not necessarily to those interested in TR's political accomplishments, but rather his personality outside of politics. Candace Millard effectively describes the need to know TR in this context in order to sculpt our image of the former president in the following clip.
If you want to understand who Theodore Roosevelt was, the man Theodore Roosevelt was, you have to understand him outside of the presidency, outside of the political arena even. You have to understand him in the context of the natural world. As all of you know, Roosevelt is an incredibly popular and familiar figure, and Many fine biographies have been written about him. But the closer I looked, the more convinced I became that there was still an important dimension of his life that had yet to be adequately explored. I think that when most people think of Roosevelt, they think of the great leader, the great statesman, the great president, and he was all of those things. But what he was for more of his life, and as passionately as anything else, was a naturalist. And what intrigued me was the story of his greatest achievement in that area, his descent of an unmapped river in the Amazon, the River of Doubt.
The River of Doubt gives us a deeper look into Theodore Roosevelt, not as the president, but as the scientific pioneer and adventurer. Roosevelt's truly swashbuckling lifestyle has captivated an audience and will continue to do so for years to come.